Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Games That Made Us. This time I'll be talking to an actual Spectrum legend of days gone by, pixel-poking graphic artist with a list of games under his belt that's longer than his legs, Bill Harbison. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Hi, thanks for asking me.
No problem. So, let me see if I've caught everything here. You started off on the ZX Spectrum working for Ocean, and you've continued working as a graphics artist throughout that whole time across multiple formats. We've got your fingerprints on Robocop, Batman, Chase HQ, WEC Le Mans, Daley Thompson's Olympic Challenge, Batman the Movie, Doctor Who Top Trumps, Toki, Sonic the Hedgehog Mobile, Sega Rally Mobile, Worms Mobile, Tokka Mobile, MMA Federation, RuneScape, Sonic All-Stars Racing. I'm probably missing quite a few there. Are there any standouts that I've missed?
I think that's... Well, I don't know. Where's you getting the list from?
This is from multiple places, I will say.
I couldn't go through the number of titles I've got on my CV. There's just too many.
No, I could well imagine. So, I mean, obviously the era in question, the main reason that I'd got in touch with you was through... it was actually through Robocop, because when I was a kid, it never really dawned on me that people were behind the games that were coming out. Certainly not teams of people. I think one of the main points of interest that people have is what are your fondest memories of working at Ocean, in particular, under the Spectrum scene?
I was kind of the same as you, because I didn't really, know that there were teams of people working on these games either. But when I picked up magazines and stuff, I was like getting to know people like Mike Lamb and Don Drake and various other people just by name or sometimes by a photograph. So when I actually went for my interview there, it was like I was getting to meet these people and then like was able to like call them friends.
That must be bizarre, especially if you've been reading about them beforehand, to then not just meet them in person, but then obviously get to know them and see them as a person as well, I guess.
Yeah, it was pretty odd, but I still keep in touch with a lot of people from that era. Like still now, I've just been in touch with a guy that I worked on Robocop 3 with at Ocean. He's just got back in touch again after like 10, 15 years, wanting to do a Commodore 64 game apparently. So I don't know if anything's going to come of that.
Yeah, very nice. It's always nice to meet up with people from the past, especially when it's obviously surrounded around such a big thing for a lot of people as well. People are still to this day playing Spectrum titles, which is pretty mind-blowing, I guess. I'm not sure if you ever maybe contemplated that when you first started out, that people would still be using these games now.
It wasn't really on my mind at that time, because it was basically you finish off one project, you have a week off, and then you're on to the next project. And the only time you were actually aware of it being a product was when you went out to W.H. Smith and you could see the box art, like the box out in the shelves.
Yeah. What did that feel like?
Oh, great. We did it every single time. Every time one of our games came out, we'd go out and just go and have a look at it on the shelf or go into a computer shop and like you might be lucky enough to see somebody loading it on the monitor behind the counter. One
of the things that I've always wondered about stuff like this, because obviously I do reviews of games and sometimes I will come across a game that I don't like, and it's part of my job to talk about that and let people know what my issues are with it. Was there anything that you ever worked on that didn't get the review you were hoping for from memory, whether it was in the past or recently?
Oh God, I did it so many times. In fact, it was only recently that I found out that stuff like Batman and Jurassic Park, which on the Amiga and ST, which I was quite proud of working on, wasn't that well received as I thought it was. I've heard a lot of people, especially on YouTube, when you see reviews of people playing it, and they've said that the driving sections and the flying sections are almost impossible to play. We only had the magazine reviews to go off, so we didn't have any other frame of reference for if the game was any good or whether anybody was enjoying it. Well, I have had one fan letter Yeah, a fan letter flooded in from somebody after we'd done Chase HQ, because we were working on something else, and Gary Bracey brought this letter around, and it was just a guy saying, you know, they really enjoyed Chase HQ, and like the team that worked on it did a really great job.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And were you solely on the artwork for Chase HQ?
Yeah.
Chase HQ, was this the one where you didn't get to have the source code, if I'm right, or I'm thinking of a different game? Did it have to be basically built from the ground up?
No, it was modified from WEC Le Mans, which Mike Lamb had worked on with Sentient Software, I think, and then they took the track code and gave it to the programmer I was working with, John O'Brien, and I don't know whether he like tightened it up or whether he rewrote it, but he made it a lot faster, and also it had to incorporate the road splitting into two. So yeah, that's where that originally came from.
It must feel good, especially when you're taking an arcade port back then and reducing it down into the 8-bit limitations that you've got, and it being received as well as Chase HQ was.
I think we got most of it.
Yeah.
Obviously, when you're doing that sort of driving game, you have to draw the scaling objects and cars and stuff by yourself. So I think originally I had done 6 from the largest to the smallest size, but obviously down to like memory restrictions, I think they ended up looking 4. They ended up using just 4 frames, which, you know, it's not the best. So the cars kind of jump forward a bit more than I would have liked. But, you know, they had to like take out a frame here and there to get as much of the arcade stuff into the Spectrum as they could. And with them only using that middle part of the screen, that meant that I could basically draw the arcade machine top at the top of the screen. So trying to kid people that they were playing the arcade by having the lights on the top and like the score and all that.
Well, I thought it was really good that you did the charity thing recently for NHS Charities, where obviously you took people's photographs and put them into Chase HQ. How did it feel going back to that original artwork and changing it up with people's requests?
It took me a bit of a while to get back into that frame of mind, because obviously we had to like plot every single pixel ourselves with a mouse. I think we were using a mouse back in those days. Before the first project, it was plotting the pixels in by keyboards, which wasn't fun. But with this, it was just work, because I use Photoshop a lot with my work anyway, so it was just finding a way to do it, and it was a hell of a lot faster. If we'd had Photoshop back then, we would have been knocking games out every 3-4 months instead of every 6 or 7 months.
Yeah, it's the beauty of modern technology, yeah. I guess that leads me on to my next question then. I was going to say, you've now got at least 3 decades under your belt working in the industry. Am I right in thinking that to have that kind of long-standing career, especially in video game industry, you'd have to be adaptable to new technologies and everything else that's going on? Yeah,
that's exactly it. You just have to use whatever is coming out at the moment, and a lot of people don't like stuff like VR or AR, but if that thing comes along, then you have to sort of get into it and learn how to use it. I know people that refused to get into 3D. They just wanted to do pixel art, and that was fine. They're still working away doing pixels, but so I guess you don't. Well, it's worked out better for me, so that I've basically been out and I've adapted and used different software and different techniques and gone from 2D to 3D. But you don't have to. If you've got the talent, you can just stick with one thing, and hopefully it'll come round and back into fashion again, especially with pixel art.
A guy called the Pixel Asylum, or Scott Vaudry, he asked how severe were the Spectrum's limitations to mitigate, such as colour clash and placement, and which of your creations had the most technical rather than artistic problems in that regard?
I didn't really see them as problems because I had been doing art on the Spectrum for like probably a couple of years before I actually started working in the industry. So I was well aware of colour clash and how to get around it, because the way that I actually got my job at Ocean was by making game mock-ups of games that were still out in the arcade. And I was doing a mock-up to show what they would look like on the Spectrum, and because I understood how it worked, and you could only have like 2 colors on a character square, then I could mock up a pretty decent image of what a game would look like. No, we didn't really have a point where we got, when we were working on a game, and thought, oh, I don't know what we're going to do here with the graphics.
Yeah,
because we all knew what we were doing.
Yeah, and I guess if you've got into the industry through your experience prior to even being in the industry, from the sounds of it, so you would have had a fairly good understanding of how to achieve what you wanted to achieve, and that's why you got the job in the first place, I guess.
I'd never done any animation, and then the first project they gave me was Daley Thompson's Olympic Challenge.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was going to have to animate all these events.
Yeah.
And obviously not being able to animate, I had to learn very quickly how to do it. So I had to learn how to do like a run cycle from reference books and from video. On the training part at the beginning of the game, I basically had to sit in front of a mirror and do the exercises myself and draw on a piece of paper what was happening in the mirror. So the guy doing the exercises on that first part of the game is based on me in my flat in front of a mirror.
Wow. Is that did I read that the little guy at the back was a friend from school?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, that was one of the last things he said to me before I moved away, was make sure you put me in your first game. So I put him in the game in the background there. Yeah.
The last question that I've got is from Twitter. So he asked, which of your games do you think you could do an even better job at given a second attempt but on the same hardware?
I'd probably like to have another go at Robocop 3 because that was bloody awful.
I haven't got around to playing Robocop 3 yet. What was the issue with it?
Don't bother. It was one of those things where I was doing sprites and someone else was doing backgrounds. There was no real design, and it felt like somebody needed to take charge of it. I felt like I wanted to take charge of it because I wanted to take it in another direction, but that would have meant pissing off my mate who was working on the backgrounds. So it just turned out to be this awful mess of stuff that's not even related to the film at all.
Right. Okay. Was it a case of too many cooks spoil the broth, or?
No, not really. There was too many ideas went into it, and there was nobody there to say, no, that's stupid, don't put that in. So I think I've thought about actually trying to do like a proper remake of like a proper Robocop game that actually follows the films and has got little cutscenes and things in it, all done in pixel art. Again, it's one of these things I'll never get around to doing.
It's just an idea floating somewhere.
Yeah,
that's a good idea.
I did start to make one. I had some game maker on the PC, and I got as far as having the old Spectrum backgrounds and an animated sprite walking around shooting things. And then I just didn't have the time to do any more to it.
So I'm going to start this off with a game that absolutely blew me away as a kid because it's probably the first sandbox-style game I ever came across, released in 1986 and based on the Steve McQueen film where he drives a motorbike into a barbed wire fence. It's The Great Escape on the ZX Spectrum. Why did you pick this one?
I liked my games on the Spectrum to be a bit more than getting from one part of the screen to the next, and then you move on to the next screen. All of the Spectrum games that I've picked are quite ambitious. It's something I was obsessed with, like the fact that this game was something more than everything. All three of them, they had something more than any of the other games. It wasn't just a simple walk into a room, pick something up, go into the next room. You actually had to follow a timetable of stuff of being in this camp, and obviously you could just wander around and do whatever you wanted to do and just follow everybody else, and that would be fine. But you could run off and do little missions and try and find things and try to dig your way out. By the way, I didn't have any instructions when I got this game, so I had absolutely no idea what I was doing.
I think even with the instructions, it's hard enough.
So it's a wonder I could actually play it at all. But that being that, it was still good to sort of be in that world and run around and go exploring and find things. That was what as soon as I got into this sort of game, it was what I wanted all the time. I wanted bigger and better with more, better graphics and stuff.
I mean, the graphics for it are incredible as well. I know they're all in monochrome, but it really, it's so detailed.
Yeah, I mean, I like stuff like School Days because that was like a similar game, but it was only contained within probably 3 screens. But this was, I don't know how big the map was, but you could go anywhere in the map at any time and do anything you wanted, which it was probably the freedom to do what you wanted that I really enjoyed about it.
Yeah, well, freedom to do what you wanted until a Nazi catches you and sends you into solitary.
No, yeah.
It's probably the first game I ever played that made me feel like if I switched it off, this game would carry on without me.
Yeah, exactly. It was almost like you were in a little, basically you were trapped in a little world, and whatever was going on was going to go on without you. It was a bit like something like Little Computer People, where you would imagine that even though the computer was off, there was still this little guy running about typing letters to people and doing all sorts of things like that. It's probably a game that I would go back and play now, especially especially having maybe the instructions and knowing what you're supposed to do, rather than just wander around aimlessly. But still, wandering around aimlessly was fun in itself.
So we're going to move from one game where the sandbox is a Nazi camp in Germany and move to another game where the sandbox is the entire universe. The next choice is Elite on the ZX Spectrum. Why this game?
Same reason. The freedom of being able to do whatever you want, but on a much bigger scale. The problem with having no restrictions is that you're sort of limited by your own imagination and your own personality, really. So I would always end up just like a sort of intergalactic bin man, just taking things from one place to another, not really making a lot of money. But it was still fun. And then occasionally, once I'd sort of got maybe a better ship or something, I would be able to sort of go out and explore a bit more. But what would stop that would be you would get to a place and then you would feel comfortable there. You'd know all the planets that are around, and then you'd feel quite comfortable. You'd say, right, I'll stay here for a while. I mean, it's a game that I still play now. I play Elite Dangerous now, but I've started playing it on the Oculus, so I've got the headset on, and that just takes it on to a completely new dimension. So you're actually sat inside the cockpit of the ship, which is a lot different from playing the Spectrum version, because obviously the graphics weren't that impressive. They were just, well, not compared to today. It was all sort of line drawn, but the way I looked on it was like the ship in Alien, or like in Escape from New York, where it was like a monitor. It was like a computer simulation of what was happening outside, because obviously when they made the films, they didn't have the money or the technology to make big massive ships fly around and land in places. or crash into buildings. So they did it quite simply, and that's the way I kind of viewed the game.
Yeah, I've never heard it looked at that way before, but yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. Really, that you're not necessarily looking out of the window; you're watching a monitor screen.
No, you feel like you're flying it by the controls, and everything else is happening outside you that you can't see. That's the way I saw it, anyway.
Yeah. And I think with it being as minimal as it is, it does open it up for using your own imagination to fill in those gaps.
Well, the fact that they managed to get a universe into the amount of memory that would probably be the header of an email at the moment, like now, the fact that they managed to do that then is like genius.
And when you bring up Elite Dangerous, it's funny because when I've only played a few bits. To be fair, I don't have a lot of experience with the original game, and playing Elite Dangerous outside of the graphical updates and everything else, the core gameplay isn't a whole lot different.
It is pretty much the same, but they've added missions and things that you can do, and certain missions that you can do with a certain type of ship. Like if you buy like a big sort of, I think I've got a sort of dolphin ship, which means that you can ferry people from one part of the galaxy as tourists and make a lot of money that way. So you can take tourists out and fly them around and bring them back.
So you've upgraded from Intergalactic Bin Man to...
I'm an Uber driver now.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. So, moving on from that, I've got a good segue for this one. I hope you're prepared. Exploring the vast emptiness of space makes you feel as small as an ant.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
That's literally all I've got. So the next game is Ant Attack on the Spectrum.
Ant Attack.
So, what is it about Ant Attack that stands out for you?
Ant Attack was the first game that I saw that had this sandbox thing going for it. I saw it at secondary school at the computer club. I'm doing like the rabbits with my fingers. Computer club, which is basically a trading area for games on tape. When I saw that, it was like, oh, the Spectrum can do a bit more than like Jetpack or Manic Miner. It can do something a bit more than that. Again, another work of programming genius by the guy that programmed it. But again, I think it was slightly limited in its gameplay because it was so complicated to move around the screen and throw grenades, and you could rotate the view around. The guy obviously had big ideas, but the hardware let him down a little bit. Yeah, I think in his head he was thinking, oh, you just spin the whole map around and then you can see from another side. But it was quite disorientating if you rotated the map around and you didn't know, you were trying to get your bearings again, and then you'd get eaten by an ant.
There is no word to describe them.
We may be witnesses to a biblical prophecy come true.
So far we've had 3 Spectrum games. We're now going to hop, skip and jump into the distant future of the late 90s because the next 2 games are N64 exclusives, the first of which is another chapter in Nintendo's long-running series and is still lauded as perhaps the greatest early 3D action RPG ever made, Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Why this game in particular?
It was a game that I just got completely lost in the world when I was playing it. It was also the first game that I ever showed my son when he was little, so it was quite a big deal. And there was so much to it. There was so many places that you could go to. The fact that you could go up and you could chat to people, you know, like this SNES version, but it was just like a little pixelated character with some text that would come up. But this, you would actually see the people and they would be animated and they would like have reactions to what you would say. There was also the map. The map was, for the time, again, huge, and you could basically go anywhere you wanted. It wasn't like the new one on the Switch where you can actually go anywhere and it's not like you have to load in the next part. But it was, I just got obsessed with it, and it was a game that I never completed. I got it on the SNES, I got it on the N64, then I bought it on the 3DS. Still never completed it, but I did complete the Switch version of the new one. When I completed it, it was weirdly emotional. The fact that I'd had this game since the 90s, and it was basically the same game. You know, you could run around and you could kill things, and you had a mission to rescue the princess, blah blah blah. It kind of sneaked up on me because I wasn't expecting to finish it, because I thought, well, if I finish it, then I won't be able to play it anymore. But I didn't know that you could still go on and do other like little missions that you hadn't done, even though you'd still completed it. So I sort of ran into this area and thought, right, I should be all right. And then I found I was battling the final boss, and then the game ended, and I was bereft. I couldn't believe it. I'd finished it. It was really strange. But if it wasn't for that first one, which I played so many times for so long, the main story about that was when I showed it to my son Edward. When I bought the console, I got the normal controller that you would get with it, and you also got this cheap crappy HMV one. So he saw me playing this game and he came and sat next to me. He was probably about 4. He was wondering what I was doing and why the little man on the screen was running about. So I plugged in this old controller and gave it to him, and he took to it straight away. So he was making him like climb up a ladder and then jump off, and then climb the ladder again and jump off and climb up the ladder again, and he found this hilarious. But he got a bit bored with it after doing that maybe 20 times. So he thought, I've had enough of this now, and threw the controller on the floor, and the game paused. It went into pause mode,
Right.
and then started. He must have knocked something inside the controller, because it started spinning through the save games. You know, you got
Oh,
3
no.
save games.
Yeah.
It went through 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 3. I was thinking, what the hell is going on here? And then it selected the game that I'd been on, which had like 70% in it.
Oh no.
And then it was going, delete, move, delete. You know, they had the 3 options at the bottom.
Yeah.
It was going through, it was whizzing through them all the time. And I was thinking, please don't fucking go on delete. Please don't. And it went on delete, deleted the entire game. That's why I never played it again until the 3DS version came out, and I thought, right, there's no way that this can happen again. But after putting all that time into it, I just could not go back and play it again.
That's the end of the game, really. There's no way you're going to go back and do all of that again. Okay. Well, I mean, all 4 of these games so far have had like quite a similar theme. They've all been very much open world, or if not open world, certainly a vast landscape to explore. And then for your last choice, we're swapping the swords for guns, elves for spies, and wizards for criminals. Final game is the most revered of all of the James Bond games, Goldeneye on the N64. So what made you pick this one for the final one?
I think it was more to do with I didn't really play a lot of multiplayer games, because especially when the screen gets split into 4, I would always get confused and be looking at somebody else's screen and then wondering why I was dying all the time. But the missions were really good. It was close to the films. There was references to other characters and other set pieces from the previous films as well. So if you were a fan, or even if you weren't even a fan, but if you'd seen them, if you'd seen any of the James Bond films, there'd be little references to it in this game. And it was that, I think, that made it entertaining to me, because it was before the term Easter egg even came up. You were looking for little hints, or like a little reference to something else, or to an instance that happened in one of the movies, or that sort of thing. But it still stuck very close to the film, the original film. So I think it was that. It was the fact that it wasn't just about Goldeneye itself. It was about James Bond. It was about the entire canon. It was about all the films.
Yeah, I think it's a very dense FPS when you, not just necessarily on what the game itself does, but in terms of how culturally important it was, especially when you consider the multiplayer. I can't remember the next time a really big split screen multiplayer game would have come out was probably Halo, I would say, and this was that generation's Halo. I don't think the PS1 had anything that touched this split screen multiplayer that Goldeneye had. It was a friend of mine that had an N64 and he had Goldeneye. I had a PS1 at the time. For whatever reason, I grew up with a SNES, but for whatever reason the N64 didn't interest me, and he ended up getting an N64 off one of his friends with Goldeneye, and we played through the entire campaign, I think, in the space of 2 days. I pretty much woke up the next morning, went straight back around to his house to carry on, and then it ended up being that 3 of us bought N64 pads to take round to his house because we just wanted to play the multiplayer, and that was pretty much an entire summer.
And it was a game that seemed to come out of nowhere as well. It wasn't really, I don't suppose it was advertised much, but it's certainly not to the extent that it would be today. So on the multiplayer, could you play you could play characters from the previous movies?
Yes, and one of the characters you could pick was Oddjob, who was half the size of everyone else, so nobody was allowed to pick him.
Why?
Because it was impossible to shoot at. Because you would always have to aim down, and
oh right, yeah, I suppose
because of the weird control. Because this was at a time where FPS games on consoles weren't really done, so the controls are very backwards when you try and play it now, and even then it was a bit janky. But your left analog stick, or the middle stick, I should say, on the N64 it's movement forward and back, but also turn left and right, where turn left and right would normally be on a second stick.
Yeah.
So what they did to mitigate that was you have a button that you hold in to aim, or it'll auto aim, so your gun will automatically point at anything that's roughly in front of you, which is very, very helpful. It doesn't really work with Oddjob unless he's quite far away, so he just had to be banned from all multiplayer games because it just made it just so completely unfair for everyone.
That is another game that I'd like to revisit, but if it means having to buy an N64 again or get hold of one, then I don't think it's going to be happening. I gave my N64 and my cartridges to my son, so he's down south somewhere, so I'm not going to see that again.
Me and Bill did record a brief ending to the show. We didn't just wander off unannounced. However, computers being as computery as they are, the last couple of minutes of Bill talking were lost to the great motherboard in the sky. So it would have just been me talking to myself, which is pretty standard for the channel, I suppose. Anyway, huge thanks to Bill for coming on the show. We ended up discussing a vast array of games over the course of this interview, and it was great to hear Bill's recollection of starting out in the industry, as well as hearing about his current career as a taxi driver in space. Links to Bill's Twitter account and eShop can be found in the video description below. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye.